Why is it, do you think, Isabel, that Sajid Javid had to apologise for using the word cower when he advised the nation, in my view, rather sensibly to stop cowering from COVID? But Michael Gove doesn't seem to be apologising or saying sorry for calling people who decide not to have the vaccine selfish. I think it's way over the top what he said, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, you may well ask. I mean, personally, I don't think Sajid Javid should have apologised. I think he was absolutely right to use those words because effectively that is what we've been encouraged to do for the last however long it is, 18 months. We have been encouraged to cower from a virus which, whilst very frightening for a minority of people, for the vast majority of people is manageable. So I don't think he should have apologised. He didn't have to, but he chose to. He was under huge pressure from the usual suspects who have a kind of professional hobby of being outraged. And I'm disappointed that he caved to that. As to Michael Gove, he has been to an extent slapped down by Downing Street in that the Prime Minister himself distance himself from these remarks. And I'm glad that the Prime Minister did, because I think that the remarks by Michael Gove are pretty unhelpful. And they're rather representative of a tone that has been adopted by many members of the government, which is a sort of bullying, hectoring attitude towards people and their individual, very personal choices about what they do and don't put into their bodies. And for every individual, there are many calculations that go into this in terms of what you think your immune system is like, how sensitive you are to things, and what is the risk, the benefit risk ratio for you given your age group. And, you know, I've had both vaccines, but I wouldn't have said it was a particularly easy decision. I've studied the yellow card data on these vaccines, and there are a lot of nasty reactions to them, as there are with almost all vaccines, but this is a population-wide program, and the like of which we've never done before. So I was hesitant, but I did do it. I felt that it was probably in my interest and in other people's interests, but I don't believe that we should be going around bullying everybody to take the vaccine. I think we could probably say at this point that those who have not taken up the vaccine have thought very long and hard about whether they should or they shouldn't do so. It's not a casual decision. They will have come under plenty of pressure, I imagine, from their own relatives, and they will be pretty well informed. And I just don't think it is for cabinet ministers to throw their weight around in that way.
Yes, it's all to do with the coercion that this government's trying to inflict on this nation. You hear these stories of apparently Boris being in a rage because the younger generation
again, I
seem
thought that
reluctant.
was a mistake,
Yeah.
and I actually didn't really believe it. I can't actually imagine Boris being in a rage over that. I think somebody probably briefed that out. I think it was probably loose language on the part of whoever briefed it, rather than a genuine characterization of the way the Prime Minister feels. Perhaps frustrated would be a more accurate way of putting it. But it doesn't help anybody, does it, really, this? You know, if we want to get to as many people vaccinated as possible, let's make the case positively for the benefits that there will be, not only for the individual themselves, but for all of us. And I just think that when you bully people like that, you back them into a corner, they're going to dig their heels in. And I think it's counterproductive.
Yeah, and also Mr. Gove should realise that I don't think it is a selfish decision to decide not to have the vaccine. It's a legitimate choice to make, but that's beside the point. In the end, Mr. Gove should realise that in Britain, it's not illegal to be selfish. This government seems to have been infected by the COVID crisis and now seems to feel it has kind of power way beyond what a government in a democratic country should have. And when Gove went on to threaten those who don't take the vaccine with a kind of second-class citizenship, you won't be allowed the same privileges as the rest of us. I mean, that would set up a divided society between those who have had the vaccine and can go to clubs and football matches, etc., and those who decided not to have the jab, who would become second-class citizens. I mean, I think that Gove and the gang are getting into territory that they haven't really thought about.
I agree with you. And I have to say, it's been horrible to watch. You know, I have known these ministers for the last 15 years, and the way they're behaving is entirely inconsistent with all the values that they held as conservatives before they got into the positions they're in now. And, you know, I looked at a report today of what's proposed in Saudi Arabia, which is as draconian as I think any country has announced. So they are proposing a travel ban on anyone who travels to their own red list of countries, and a number of other really awful measures. And you know what? I thought, you know what? I wouldn't be absolutely that surprised if our government doesn't take inspiration from this, if they don't go down exactly the same unbelievably extreme route, because at the moment they seem to be getting ever more draconian, ever more authoritarian, and it is just not who they are. And I find it extraordinary that as many people are accepting this as the polls would have us believe. I'd like to think that the polls, which put the Tories still well ahead of anyone else, are inaccurate. And I guess part of the problem is that Labour, so far from opposing any of this, is actually arguing that the government should go even further. So voters probably feel that they have no choice at this point.
I've heard through the grapevine that Gove is somewhat shocked by the response to his statement last night, just how appalled people were by it. Do you think that the response of the public might inform the government that if they try to bring in vaccine passports on a general level, as they're threatening to, for students, for people, you can't go to football unless you've got one, you can't travel unless you've got one, etc., etc. Do you think that it may help the government to realise that vaccine passports are going to be a very, very bad idea?
Well, I'd really like to think so, but I'm not that optimistic, because this seems to be a government that doesn't really care what anyone thinks. They just press ahead anyway. I mean, many of the measures that they've introduced have been utterly vile, I think. We could sit here and talk for a long time about how they said that people at funerals can't comfort each other, how they have banned people from holding the hands of their elderly and dying relatives. Where do you even begin with some of the grotesque measures that this government has seen fit to introduce and seemingly thought necessary? And, we're only beginning to get a flavour of the devastating collateral damage that all that has caused. And we're going to be picking up the pieces from this for a very, very long time to come. So it would be nice to think that they cared about public opinion. And we're told that a lot of these measures are kind of driven by number 10 focus groups. I do wonder who on earth is in these focus groups, and whether they select people who are chosen to agree with everything that the government wants. And Michael Gove has been, I think, ominously quiet these last few months, and I knew he was up to no good. It's a bit like when a toddler goes quiet in another room. You know that they've probably got your makeup bag, and when you go in there, there's going to be lipstick everywhere. Well, I think that Michael Gove has given himself away with this comment. We now know exactly the type of thing that he has been pushing for and the tone that he has been setting behind the scenes. And whilst I am disappointed, I'm not surprised, because I had my suspicions.
On that tack, why do you think it was that Boris Johnson, before July the 19th, when he announced it was coming, he said it is time to hand back responsibility to the people for their own health and their own safety? That was an encouraging move in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. And yet, come July the 19th, he backtracked on all of that. It is time to give us back our lives and to give us back our responsibility for our own health, isn't it? When do you think this government might do that? And why do you think Boris was deflected from that intention?
Because he's Boris Johnson, and he is not consistent, and he's torn. He is at heart a libertarian. You'd really have no idea of that.
I'm really starting not to buy that, Isabel. He seems to me to be like a sort of old school Soviet communist.
I know, absolutely. And you know what? The real Boris would be appalled by the things he's doing. It's almost like he's having an out-of-body experience.
Yes.
And I wonder whether in a few years' time he's going to look back on all this and have the kind of the presence of mind to realize just how appalling it all was, and that he was the one that implemented it? Or has he kind of detached himself from his own decisions, as if there are two different people, Boris the decent human being, the libertarian, and Boris the prime minister? So he flip-flops because people get to him, and it must, in fairness, be very difficult being under a barrage of pressure from so many different so-called experts. And ultimately, this isn't so much about the survival of the British people. It's about the survival of the Conservative Party, and more specifically, the survival of Boris Johnson and his premiership. And what he fears is that accusation somewhere down the line of, well, you opened up too early and you killed a load of people. And that's all that will play on his mind. I don't mean to say that he has no human feeling or no compassion. And of course, everybody wants to save lives, but he will be driven by a fear of getting it wrong, and that then he and his party will be accused forevermore of having been negligent and reckless and irresponsible. And, to a certain extent, one can understand that fear. Any of us in that position would have that concern.
I mean, you must have known Boris over the years. I mean, he strikes me as a straw in the wind. He changes every 10 minutes. He says something, goes back on it. The scientists come in, he changes his mind again. This represents a bit of a problem for this nation in the current predicament we're in.
Well, we know that from, the most famous example is when he wrote two different versions of an article for the Telegraph, one supporting being in the EU and the other one not. And there's a bit of me in a sense that rather admires people that are open to both sides of the argument, but I think he takes it far too far. And in the end, a leader has to lead. And I think that's what we haven't seen here. Boris Johnson should have followed his instincts, which were and always have been that people should make their own decisions and choices about risk. And I think we've minimized the risk as far as we're ever going to minimize the risk. We're not going to get any better than this. And it is clearly not in the interests of children to vaccinate them. Fortunately, the Joint Committee on Vaccinations has, at the moment, reached that same conclusion. So I don't think we're going to get any safer than this. It's time now to get on with things. And most importantly, stop crippling the NHS when you're pretending to us all that everything we're doing is protecting it. It's not. It's actually undermining the NHS. We're destroying the NHS. And I know that's a big thing to say, but if you store up as many health problems, non-COVID health problems, as we're doing now, you are going to break the NHS.
You're not wrong. We did a piece about that yesterday, that the NHS really is staring into the abyss. Unless it's reformed pretty damn quickly, it's not going to exist in the form that it's in anymore. And I'll tell you one thing, Isabel, as we say farewell, thank you so much for your time tonight. If this government, say come September, October, and the numbers go up or something, if they start saying, well, we're going to have to lock you down now to protect the NHS, good luck with that, because people will say we're sick of protecting the NHS. It's just become a slogan, a cliche, and it's time the NHS started protecting us. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. I tell you what, I know many people who will seriously think about leaving the country if it goes that far. And you will get that amongst those who generate wealth, the business leaders, people who've got enterprises who employ people. If this goes on and on and on, and we are also being taxed for it at ludicrous rates, and of course we're going to have to be taxed at ludicrous rates to pay for all of this, then you're going to see a flight of wealth from this country, and that is not in anyone's interest.
And if they do lockdown again as well, I'll tell you what, people will be out on their doorsteps, not cheering, they'll be booing the NHS.